Okay, so we're dealing with this question for Ndogi PLC. Okay, we're on part C, which is saying, assuming Ndogi PLC has a gearing level of 40% as measured by the debt to equity, estimate the weighted average cost of capital based on the result from A1 and B2. Okay, so colleagues, gearing just tells you how much debt financing a company uses. Okay, a higher gearing level, it means the company uses a lot of debt. Okay, so now there are some disadvantages and advantages of using debt. One of the disadvantages is that if you take on more debt, you have more interest to be paying up, and you might default on those interest payments. Okay, and remember also, the more interest payments that you take is going to affect the shareholders because your profit after tax, they've deducted the interest, the taxes, and everything. It's going to be lower because you're taking on more interest payments. Okay, so this formula for gearing, it's debt over equity. This is the formula. Okay, and after we divided the debt by the equity, we got 0.4, which represents 40%. So how you interpret this ratio? You're comparing how much debt you have compared to e- how much debt financing you use compared to how much equity financing you use. Okay. So with this 0.4, which is also 40%, what this means, for every one quarter of equity financing the company uses, the company has, so you get 40% of one quarter floating away in a debt. We can say it's using floating way of debt financing. Okay, for every one quarter of equity financing, there's floating way of debt financing. Or for every 100 quarter of equity financing, 40% of 100 quarter, there is a 40 quarter of debt financing. Okay, you can use any multiples if you want. You say for every 1,000 kwacha of equity financing, 40% of 1,000 kwacha, that's 400 kwacha. There's 400 kwacha of debt financing. Okay, so this information here is what we're going to use for our weightages because in the question they haven't told us how much equity financing this company has, and they haven't told us how much debt financing this company has. They've only just given us the gearing level. Okay. So with this gearing level, we're just going to assume some estimates of the equity financing and the debt financing, which are these here. Where I said for every one quarter of equity financing, there is 14 way of debt financing. Or for every 100 quarter of equity financing, there's 40 quarter of debt financing. Okay, so I'll choose to use this. For every 100 kwacha of equity financing, there is 40 kwacha of debt financing. So in my work formula, for the equity financing, I'll use 100 kwacha, and for my debt financing, I'm going to use 40 kwacha. Any questions before I move on? how much debt financing a company uses. So if you say a gearing level of 40%, you can assume that for every one quarter of equity financing, the company is using 14 way of debt financing. Because this gearing ratio, you're comparing equity financing to debt financing. Okay. As an investor, you always want to invest in a company that has got more equity financing. Okay. Yes. So this debt to equity ratio, if it's above one, because before you convert it to the percentage, if it's above one, just know the company is using more debt financing. If it's below one, like in this case here, it's 0.4, which represents 40%. Okay. If it's below one, it means the company uses more equity financing. Okay. You need to remember this information in year four because you'll see these things again. So remember this from today onwards, colleagues. This gearing ratio here. If it's greater than one, more debt financing. Less than one, more equity financing. How you interpret this ratio? If they have got a gearing ratio of 40%, okay, for every 10 kwacha of equity financing that you have, Madam Yvonne, how much debt financing would you have? Yes. Okay. So the total financing here, when you say E plus D, okay, because this is for the weightages. This information is for the weightages part. So here we'll use 140. Okay. Uh-huh. So the work formula, as you can see here, okay, now with companies, cost of debt, you add this 1 minus T. Okay, when you're in this assignment, that's how you represent the formula. KD has to have a 1 minus T. And I hope we remember what that 1 minus T represents. Yes. So have you seen the weighted average cost of capital formula? E over E plus D. This is the weightage for equity. Okay. You're just asking out of your total financing, what percentage represents equity? Okay. And then here, D over E plus D is the weightage for debt. Okay. Out of your total financing, how much debt? What percentage is represented by debt? Okay. So in the question they told us, use the results from A1. So A1, that was for cost of capital. Not cost of capital, cost of equity. So cost of equity, 21% here. Okay, cost of equity, 21%. So you say KA 21%. That's from A1. Okay. Then from B2, they said cost of debt, after tax cost of debt, basically. Yes, 15.28%. Okay. So now we can just put the information in our formula here. E, we said 100. Okay, so even though you use 100, 1, 10, 1,000, even other numbers, your weightages will be the same because whatever number you choose for equity, you just get 40% of that number that will represent debt. Okay, so not 100 people should use 140. Others use 1 and 10, 1 and 0.4. Others use 10 and 4 kwacha. Others just pick any amount of equity. Okay, yeah, then get 40% of that amount. So 100 over 140. Cost of equity was 21%, plus for debt 40 over 140 times 15.28. 15.28. So 100 divided by 140, 0.714. It's 21%. Plus 40 divided by 140 gets 0.28. Okay. You must make sure these two they add up to 100. These two weightages have to add up to 100. So you can say 286. Okay, times 15.2. So 0.714 multiplied by 21, 14.994. We'll just say 14.99%. Okay. Plus, yes, 0.714 and 0.286. Yes, weightages always have to add up to, I think, to 100% or 1. Okay. 0.286 multiplied by 15.28, you get 4.37%. Okay. So 4.37 plus 14.99, going to get 19.36%. This is the weighted average cost of capital for Ndogi Limited.